So today we're going to be looking at a video that I actually recorded what seems like years ago, man. But in Chicago at the Mid-Atlantic Theater Conference, MATC, which was in, when was that? March. Mid-March, not that long ago, right as all this coronavirus stuff was just starting to hit. But it was kind of the last thing I was able to do before everything shut down. I got to see some good friends and catch up with, among other people, Rick Gilbert from R&D, Violence Design. Got to see one of the shows that he worked on, and be on a little panel with a couple of folks from R&D about using violence to research and express character. So sort of the dramaturgy of character work and character creation through fight choreography. But while he was there, I figured I'd also pick his brains a little bit for PewTube, because I quoted him, used a couple of stories and anecdotes of his in the Theatrical Firearms handbook. He's been very helpful. We email each other periodically, once or twice a year. He'll shoot me an email and be like, hey, do you have anything that does this? Or do you know an answer to this problem that we've got? Most of them, same problems we still don't have an answer to. But every now and again, we can help each other out. So let's give a little listen to some words of wisdom from Rick. Hey, all right. So this is Kevin Inoue. PewTube is trying to make a comeback. And as a part of this effort, since I am at the MATC Theater Conference, I thought I'd ask some friends of mine who also work with Theatrical Firearms on a regular basis to share their perspective about what the Chicago market is like and some of the challenges that they've been dealing with and the opportunities that they've had. So it's always good to get some fresh faces on here. So I'm going to flip this around. Hey, so since I don't know if the tags are going to be visible. Yeah, they kind of are. Why don't you go ahead and introduce yourselves for me real quick.
Hi, I'm Rick Gilbert. I'm a violence designer here in Chicago.
And I'm Victor Bayona. I'm also a violence designer here in Chicago. Together, we are partners in R&D Choreography.
What kind of gigs do you guys usually end up working?
It's a huge range from professional downtown theaters to our sort of favorite kind of bread and butter theater is the Chicago storefront scene. And that presents its own very significant gun issues, of course. But we also work in colleges and in high schools. Another situation where gun stuff, like I find myself occasionally saying the sentence, all right, I got to bring the guns to the high school. And I'm like, what has happened to my life? This is a sentence I ever say, right?
Yeah.
So let's talk about some of the sort of storefront theater thing. We're talking mostly black boxes, mostly non-proscenium. Or is it a mix?
Generally, actual proscenia are extremely rare.
Yeah.
But end staging is not. It's not. It does happen occasionally, but I would say 2/3 of the time we're not end staged.
Alley or
alley theater happens all the time, and that's effectively in the round. Although it has some options.
Deep thrusts.
Yeah, and then the Chicago L-shaped theater where there's seats on two sides, which is essentially a sort of pointy thrust.
Yep.
But doesn't look like one. Like with a thrust, you think that's downstage, and then there's people on the sides. With seats here and seats here, you really have that's downstage and also that's downstage, which is a little different. But it also makes us think about, like, in terms of theatrical firearms, if we're using a firing gun, like, where are we pointing it? There now is a very limited range of things that are not pointing at the audience at some point.
Yeah.
And of course, if there's shells going places,
So let's talk about that a little bit. I mean, how often are you choosing to, or is the design team choosing to use blanks in a venue like that? Because volume is going to be an issue, especially with semi-automatics.
Yes, that's for sure.
Do you end up using a lot more revolvers, or?
Yeah, semi-automatics are really hard to use because there's no quiet semi-automatics.
We have one, and we're thrilled to get an opportunity to use it. But even then, it turned out to be a little too loud for the space.
What is it?
What's the gun, or what's?
Yeah, you said you had one that works in small.
One semi-auto.
But it uses 8 or 9 millimeter blanks.
Yes.
Okay.
Yeah.
I thought you were saying you had one that was quiet. I was like, ooh, tell me about it.
No, I'm waiting for some company to build a quieter semi-auto.
Yeah.
Do all the cool stuff.
Yeah.
So normally half load, primer only.
half load or primer only, depending
Yeah.
on the space. I mean, some spaces are very small, and then and you know, obviously you know more about this than I do, but the variety of guns makes as much of a difference sometimes as the variety of loads. It's like, wow, a quarter load in here sounds as loud as a half load in that gun does. So it's feeling it out. There's usually part of the rehearsal process is, okay, let's get into the space sometime with the director and be like, okay, here are our options. How loud did you want it? Because people are like, oh, we should use quarter loads, right? I'm like, let's listen to them and you tell me, because maybe you only need primers, or maybe we're using 22s and 22 shorts are loud, but a 22 short is not dangerously loud in most of the guns we have in most of the spaces we use. It's just quite loud. And my preference is always, if we're using blanks, it's because we want people to feel like a gun was actually fired, which means, which to me means it should be loud.
Right.
Like if it's not disturbingly loud, why are we not using a sound effect to do something really cool, and then we can do something that's less expensive, less potentially traumatizing, because that's something we think about audiences.
More reliable.
Yeah, that's right. It's going to go bang every time you pull the trigger. We have a couple of revolvers that I feel like, knock wood, have been extraordinarily reliable for us. But again, there's so many reasons not to use a blank, that the reason to use a blank is because we want audiences to feel like a gun has actually been fired in front of them, which is only sometimes the case. I mean, realism is a thing, it's not the thing.
What types do you go to for reliability? The Echo Vipers or the Numerex? Like for reliability, yes.
We've got a couple of we've got a Numerex that you recommended to us and has served us very nicely. It's not the most beautiful gun, but it's but so far it has always gone bang every time somebody pulled the trigger, and that's really quick.
Is that the Chief Special or whatever?
The sort of elongated. And then we have an NEF Firearms starter pistol. I wish we had bought more of those. And we have one that we had somebody reshape a lot of the pieces so that it looks like it looks
more like a gun.
And it looks like it's got the lanyard hook and the elongated handle, and it's stretched so that it looks a little bit like a Webley, like a Webley Mark IV. And that's a hard gun. And it's a gun that we want to use not all the time, but like when you want a gun from the end of the 19th, beginning of the 20th century that isn't a cowboy gun and isn't a German military gun, it's the gun, right? That doesn't look like it's modern and doesn't look like it's a cowboy. And that is super reliable, although the very short cylinder is a very short cylinder. But likewise, that one has never not fired when we pull the trigger. Not so far.
It's one of our favorites.
And unfortunately, both of those are now like impossible to find in this country.
If it works, we should stop making it.
The Umarex didn't stop making; they stop importing.
Oh, okay.
They're still made. This is Umarex USA stopped importing blank guns. They decided to drop that from their imports. So I bought up like the last of those revolvers. I still have like a little stash. But they just don't. But they still make a whole bunch over in Europe, and there's some really awesome models out there, but you can't get them. Like the only blank firing 1911 I've ever found that's at all reliable is the Umarex, and we can't get those here.
Well, I go to Europe occasionally.
We can talk.
Because a 1911 that fired would be good.
For a little while, there was a company in Spain that would ship them to me, and then they said they stopped shipping to the U.S.
But that's an 8mm as well, right?
9mm.
9mm.
But still loud.
And still,
So what about sound cues? How accepting do you feel like audiences are when sound cues when they're trying for realism versus ways in which you stylized it?
What? Yeah, I'm sorry.
No, just that sound cues tend to be pretty difficult to create this kind of sound that we want usually. just, I don't know, there's a quality to it that doesn't feel present enough.
I think that the sound cue in Jane Byrne at Looking Glass works pretty well, and I think the reason is because the shot is a surprise. The gun comes out and boom, and is fired immediately, and the sound effect hits. If somebody sees a gun being pointed, they're like, oh, it's about to fire, and then I think we process it differently.
Yeah.
And that's something that I never...
That our expectations can kick in, and
And I never noticed that before this week. Like, just this week, I was in rehearsal and I was like, that sound effect totally worked. And the sound designer said, yeah, I think it's because of the surprise, because people don't have time to process sound. And they obviously, they're very good sound designers, and they know about how audiences receive sound in the same way that we know about how audiences receive violence. And so I believe his answer. But it's something that I think we'll think about more in the future, about like if we want a sound effect for realism. And then on the other hand, there's a show like was the 16th Street show with the soldier coming back from so there's a
Hero's
show
Wife.
Hero's Wife. Nice. And there's 3 gunshots during the course of the show. There's one where the guy is teaching her how to shoot. It's a soldier comes back, PTSD, and she's trying to deal with her husband having PTSD, and he's not acknowledging that he does. And there's a scene where they go out shooting outside, and then there's a scene where he's teaching her to shoot in a shooting range, and then there's a final scene at the end where he doesn't wake up, but he becomes conscious and pulls out a gun and shoots it at her, although it does not hit her. And we did different things for each of the 3. That is, the outside shot, we used a sound effect that was because it was a memory sort of flashback thing. So there's the sound effect that was mainly focusing not on the gunshot itself, but on the tinnitus immediately after it, which is an effect I love, getting that ringing in your ears sound, you know. And
we used that for Gloria,
Right. And then the second, in the shooting range, they're wearing ear protection.
Oh, so that muffles it?
And so we did a sound effect of sort of the noise canceling sound and a really, sound effect that sounded weird and muffled. And then in the third shot we used a blank, and that was shocking. And very loud. But that was a half load. I want to say I think it was a half load 9mm round. Or 380. Because it was a revolver. And that, I think, worked particularly effectively because, again, giving an audience a different experience, 3 different experiences of the shooting made the final shot more shocking because they hadn't yet heard a real shot. And at the same time,
we weren't necessarily expecting it either.
And now we've set up a different expectation. And that I thought was particularly effective. And they get a little bit of, I don't know if we put a little ring in. I can't remember if there was a little ringing.
I don't remember either, actually.
Tone after that or not, because it's something I know we discussed in the production meeting, but I can't remember what the show actually ended up, whether we cut it in tech or not, or edited in tech.
No, that's interesting. What was I supposed to say? I had something earlier and then I got distracted by that was cool. Progression there. In terms of, that's what I was gonna say. Have you ever tried recording a sound effect of a full load blank and then using that as the sound cue, but recording in the space?
We have done that, and it does work sometimes. I mean, again, I'm not a sound designer, and so in general, that's something that I want to leave to them because they're going to do a better thing. But we have occasionally, they've asked to record stuff, and when that is their idea, it tends to work well because they've already thought, this is how I'm going to do it.
Yeah.
I remember we've also done it where we suggested, we could just record that, and they tried it, and then I was like, that doesn't sound very good.
Yeah.
And they ended up doing something else again. And it's not because it's not my idea, I'm not going to make it work. It's more like, once I have an idea and I'm an expert, that is, they're an expert, they're going to make it work.
Yeah. Cool. So another thing about these kind of storefront theaters where you've got businesses on either side and apartments maybe above, things like that, what do you end up having to do? And Chicago's not entirely unique relationship with gun violence, but maybe infamous is a good word.
They're certainly coming.
So what is standard protocol in terms of notifications and things like that when you're working with blanks?
I feel like stage management usually, or production management usually takes care of that.
Yeah, and it varies depending on the location, and also on one of the things about blanks I found is that while they may be quite loud, they do not go through walls the way real gunfire does.
Yeah.
Like the sound fall off seems to be, and I don't know why that is, but it seems like the sound fall off is a little quicker. Like there's frequently times when we're like, okay, let's try this shot, and then I'll go out into the lobby and I'll be like, did you do it? And that was like, we're having a question about whether this shot is uncomfortably loud for the audience. Like is it too loud? And then I'm just through a single wall, and suddenly I'm like, was that it? Was that a shot? In a university setting where we don't know who's going to be in the building, that's a different question.
Yeah.
And every university has its own procedures, but you got to talk to campus security and let them know that this is going to happen. And we've done the same thing with police, local police, in a if the theater is got windows that are covered over with something rather than brick walls or something where a gunshot can be heard outside, then you definitely need to tell the police, because police don't really have much of a sense of humor about gunshots, especially I think in Chicago. So it's a case by case. You got to figure out like what is what are we hearing and where, and then who do we need to notify?
Yeah. Usually the theaters know their spaces and know their neighborhoods too, and we'll just have protocols or these ideas of what kind of protocols to put in place.
If they're the kind of theater that has a gunshot in their show, it's fairly likely that it's not the first time.
Yeah.
But there's new theaters popping up all the time, which is the joy of Chicago, and the kind of part of our mission is to be working with those theaters. Like we really like to work with brand new theaters and storefront theaters because I feel like that's where the art that is most exciting to me is usually happening, and also it's nice to be able to help. To be like, okay, this one thing, you guys are doing a thing that you've never done before. This one thing, we can take care of this, and that's sort of nice.
Cool. Finally, what would you say are some of the biggest challenges that you have in working with either with actors or directors or with audiences in dealing with prop firearms here?
I feel like there's sort of conflation between theatrical firearms and Hollywood firearms. And some people assume the same protocols for theatrical firearms that they have learned or have heard about for Hollywood firearms.
And they have those expectations?
Yeah. When in fact, the guns that we often use are side venting. And the dangers they pose can be different from
dangers of front venting gun or a real firearm.
Yeah.
Actually, this is one of the things that I try to stress to actors is sometimes you'll hear people say you should treat every prop gun as if it was a real gun, and I don't exactly want you to do that. I want you to treat everything like what it is. This is a prop firearm, it is not dangerous in the ways that a real gun is dangerous. It is dangerous different ways, and I want you to be thinking about there's gas and grit going out to the side here. There's nothing going out the front. We don't actually own any front venting firearms, and we don't do a ton of film work. If we are, we'll say, okay, let's get an armorer and get somebody to do that, unless guns is the only thing we're doing, and then we are the armorer, but we'll be treating it differently and we'll rent that stuff. Because on stage, I haven't yet found a situation where, especially in smaller theaters, where I would rather have the exhaust out the front than the ability to point a gun directly at somebody. Almost always on stage, I would rather have the ability to point the gun just directly at somebody. And I don't want any confusion. I'm happy to never have any confusion. If there is a gun that vents out the front, it's because we rented it specifically for this production, and it's that box, and none of our guns are here. But what that means is I want actors to think, and then there's two dangers from a prop firing gun. One is gas and grit coming out the side, and the second is, or the top, depending on where it is. And the second is it's loud. Your hearing is fragile, and you want to have it through your whole life. So the sound is a concern. I don't want people thinking about where am I pointing this as a danger. I want them to be thinking about where am I pointing this as a story element. And also, and this ties into the questions about actor danger, especially lately. More and more as time goes on, there are actors who we're working with who have had guns pointed at them in anger or fired at them in anger, and that means a whole different kind of care for people. You shouldn't point guns at people, and it's not because pointing at them is dangerous. It's because you shouldn't point guns at people. Right? It's rude, and it's potentially traumatizing, and it's potentially triggering of existing trauma. And those are all about care. Now, fortunately, with the increase in awareness of intimacy design and consent building, we're getting a language, and people are becoming familiar with a language and starting to accept a language about that kind of actor care. And
negotiation.
Yeah. And that came in some ways out of the sort of stage combat community, and now it's giving back to the community as it develops its own set of tools that are more appropriate to the kind of work that those folks are doing. And I couldn't be more grateful for ways to talk to actors about how you should, what your relationship with this prop firearm should be and is, and what your comfort is about. That's not about hey, cool, a gun, which 30 years ago was what everybody who did theatrical firearms was thinking, right? You hand an actor a gun when every actor you're running into is a young, white, college-educated, never had a gun pointed at them person whose entire experience with guns is
Dirty
Harry, and that's positive. That's wow, guns are cool.
Yeah.
And that's just no longer the case. But fortunately, we have tools now to try to tell the stories that directors want to tell, while taking care of both actors and audiences. Although that's a different question.
Yeah. But we do have the option of being able to point guns at one another or at ourselves if we can negotiate that, if we give consent. So yeah, at least that is not a physical danger of the guns we use.
Cool. All right. Thank you very much.
Well, thank you, Kevin.
Thank you.
Have to talk to you anytime.
So until next time, this is Kevin Inoue with Fight Designer LLC. Stay tuned, subscribe, like, share, ask questions. Most of my videos have come out of questions that I've gotten either as a props rental business, about props, or comments from videos or things like that. So, I do respond to feedback. I'm happy to have your ideas if there's stuff that you want to know about. Sometimes I've got the things, sometimes I don't. Someone put in a request for a review of some of the Civil War blank firing revolvers from Pieta. I don't have any of those. They cost about $400 a piece, and I can't afford them. But if somebody wanted to send me some, I'd be happy to review them. I do this for free. I don't have a Patreon or anything. Maybe I should look into that. I don't know. If you think you would actually support YouTube through that in exchange for more reliable, consistent content, let me know. But otherwise, I kind of have to make do with what I've got. But thanks to Fight Designer LLC, the prop weapons rental business that I run, I do have a fair amount. And so we'll be taking a look at some other props as we go forward. But like I said, I take requests. Keep in touch. Let me know. And until next time, stay safe. Have fun. Look good. Stay sane. Stay separate. Don't get sick. And take care.